Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. I'm Toni Samick, Chair of SLIS, and we are at the next stage in our ongoing research and scholarship series here at this school for the academic year 2015 to 2016. We are recording this talk as we are usually. We always ask permission, of course. I do want to say before I introduce our illustrious speaker that we are having relatively small audience face-to-face, which is a result of a commitment to recording. We know that we have a large virtual audience, which will be ongoing. Those of you in this room obviously can chat with Jared here, and then we will encourage ongoing participation with those people that access the recordings. The recording will be archived on the SLIS website along with the others. Jared is a very recent graduate of a combined Master's in Humanities Computing and the Master of Library and Information Studies. His convocation was in June 2015, am I right? Mm-hmm. June 2015, so he's less than a year out of the U of A, and he's skyrocketed to international recognition in the field of intercultural information ethics. He's already been invited to such countries as the US, Israel, Germany. He's really making a name. The school is incredibly proud to have you in the midst, and I think it's a great inspiration to students, faculty, sessionals, our colleagues in the broader community, just to see the quality of student that comes through the program and the potential for each graduate that the world really is our oyster, and sometimes you got to take a risk and jump off the cliff, and that we can really learn from you. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to invite you back so soon to the school, is tell us what you're doing, engage us in the process. I had the immense pleasure to co-supervise Jared Bielby's master's thesis with Jeffrey Rockwell, the philosopher in humanities computing, on the subject of the heritage of WikiLeaks. And as you'll hear underneath Jared's talk today is really interesting intersections of 21st century life and information and access to information and concerns for social responsibility. He's going to share a project, a sort of a common project that he's initiated, partly through his learning in his role with the International Center for Information Ethics, and he's working on a project to bring together those in the field of education and information ethics for a common global project. He will share that with us. We will have the recording, and please spread words among friends and colleagues if there is an interest in contribution. I will turn the floor over to you. When we get to the Q&A at about 10 to 12, just know, as is the usual practice here, in order to pick up your question on the recording, put your hand up and I'll approach you with the mic. And I think Jared will share his email as well, so that especially for those people watching at a distance, they'll know how to get a hold of him. Thank you so much for being here. It's an incredible honor to have you.
Well, thank you, Toni, for inviting me. And thank you for coming. I appreciate being invited back here. It's odd to think that the last time I was here was a student, and I've done quite a few things since then, including this project here. Like Toni said, this project is kind of a common project. I've proposed this project as a project open to collaboration with other professionals in the field, and I'll give you kind of the rundown of the project itself, and if you have any questions and or suggestions at the end, I'm definitely open to both. So what I've done for you today, and this is actually a expanded version of the proposal that I did for the Elise presentation in Boston recently. So this is picking up from where I left off there. It's a proposal for an international intercultural information ethics curriculum. And it's really an expansion of the work that's been done in the field already in intercultural information ethics, which I will give kind of a brief rundown in history of what that entails and go forward from there. So basically my project wants to address the worldwide information ethics spectrum. And so it does so from a pedagogical angle, looking at teaching information ethics worldwide, different schools, different universities, different cultural contexts around the world. And so the inspiration for my project was certainly a combination of getting involved with the International Center for Information Ethics, which I'm currently the co-chair of, working with Rafael Capurro and looking at, on a daily basis, the field of information ethics around the world and kind of the different branches and different directions that it's taken in the last 20 years or so. Along with the International Center for Information Ethics, my inspiration was the founding philosophy of the ALIS group, so the special interest group of the Association for Library and Information Science Education. And as per the position statement on information ethics ratified at the original ALIS business meeting, the position statement is in line with my project. Knowledge and understanding of pluralistic, intercultural information, ethical theories and concepts, including ethical conflicts and responsibilities facing library and information professionals around the world, are necessary to relevant teaching, learning, and reflection in the field of library and information studies and information-related professions. So my proposal for the project is one that's common in the field of intercultural information ethics. In fact, it's kind of the founding philosophy, not so much of information ethics, but of intercultural information ethics, which is, of course, a subfield of that. And basically, it's the proposal that information ethics, being informed by comparative world philosophies, assumes a cultural bias in the pedagogical methodology of any subject of education, but it assigns information ethics an extra level of responsibility to recognize that those embedded values and their biases and to act on that recognition. The primary task of information ethics in developing a foundational philosophy for intercultural information ethics is to move beyond only Western presumed value-laden ICT development towards informed intercultural information societies. And my apologies, I used an abbreviation there without an explanation. ICT, for anyone who doesn't know, is Information and Communication Technologies. So the goal of my project is to develop an inclusive information ethics curriculum for online teaching and as well an open source database for worldwide information ethics pedagogy. As well as that, the focus is on expanding the information ethics curriculum to create a flexible international online course or courses that are able to accommodate culturally relevant materials for individual student learning. And as such, the project here is twofold. First of all, my first task will be to build an international open access online databases of all the pedagogical resources in the field for the teaching of information ethics. The second task is then to develop the curriculum, being an online international intercultural curriculum to be taught by information ethics practitioners around the world. One thing that underlies the idea of this project is that it'll be kind of centered at the International Center for Information Ethics, either sponsored or encouraged by the members of the International Center, with the original idea being that those members of that center will then work out of the International Center of Information Ethics to incorporate this type of teaching. So the end goal of the project is to develop a pedagogy for the field that encompasses the cultural nuances that perhaps are not present in localized information ethics curricula. The idea being that all information ethics courses taught out of universities are localized, but that in the field, specifically to the nature of the field itself, the entire project is global. You can't teach information ethics in an ICT world without having a global understanding of the field itself. And so again, the goal is to be able to represent differing cultural foundations as relevant to the student's own specific cultural background. As I mentioned before, the project picks up from work previously done in addressing curriculum in not just intercultural, but information ethics in general. But specifically, there have been a number of projects that have looked at the wider scope of what it means to develop a curriculum for intercultural information ethics as opposed to just information ethics. I've got a brief overview of 4 case studies here, 4 examples that have looked at teaching a curriculum or developing a curriculum, either localized or localized in context to an intercultural setting. The first one looked at differences, similarities in curriculum teaching information ethics courses in Croatia and Slovenia. And so the study was titled Information Ethics as Reflected in LIS Curricula, Comparative Analysis of Croatian and Slovenian Learning Programs. So what they wanted to do was to compare the different learning programs and to look to see if there were any cultural nuances that differentiated or informed each other of the curriculum. They looked at 4 different departments in 4 different universities throughout Croatia and Slovenia. They looked at undergraduate and postgraduate LIS programs. And they looked at how information ethics is taught at these departments is reflected through the curricula and available through syllabi. So it was kind of the methodology was basically gathering the materials, looking at the different ways that they're presented. So they based their research on the research page of the International Center for Information Ethics. And this was before I joined them there. So a number of years ago now, 2008. And so what informed their project was the basic directive of ICIE, which states that the development of moral values, what ICIE does, it examines and evaluates the development of moral values in the information field. It examines and evaluates the creation of new power structures in the information field, the hidden contradictions and internationalities in information theories and practices, and the development of ethical conflicts in the information field at a global level. Their conclusion was that it was necessary in developing new teaching programs that it will soon have to evaluate and adjust to the ever-changing emerging needs of the information field, which, as everyone knows, it's ever-changing, and especially at an intercultural level. So information ethics is, like a lot of fields, but perhaps more so, not static, but very dynamic. They concluded that knowledge must constantly adapt to the changes in the new environment, and that the digital divide, not just between rich and poor anymore, is present in every classroom in multiple degrees. The digital divide especially reflected in countries of average development such as Croatia and Slovenia, where differences in society are obvious, including the classrooms. Educating students with very diverse cultural characteristics, therefore the teaching techniques have to be adapted to such a situation. And they concluded that they must provide the foundations for intercultural dialogue through the recognition of different kinds of information cultures and values. And so they concluded with these 2 quotes, one from the Elise website and one from Tony Carbo. And so I'll read them out loud for the online purposes. From Elise: there should be offered periodically 1 or more courses devoted specifically to information ethics. Such courses should be taught by a qualified member of the faculty and be based on international literatures from a diversity of viewpoints. And Tony Carbo says, teaching information ethics to a very diverse group of students, both graduate and undergraduate, most working towards careers as information professionals, raises a number of challenges. The challenges relate to determining the most effective methods to teach the complex subject of information ethics, and to meeting the varied and often changing needs of a very diverse group of students. So the second case study that's kind of addressed intercultural information ethics comes out of Botswana, entitled incorporation of information ethics into the curriculum at the University of Botswana. The objective of this study was to establish what courses included ethical content, either from a morality standpoint or information ethics, at the curriculum at the University of Botswana. And so the two research questions that founded this project included what ethics or related courses are incorporated into the curriculum at the university, and what information ethics courses are available or taught in the curriculum. They looked at various courses taught at the university that included any topic dealing with ethics or morality, especially in the technology landscape. And they retrieved they looked and retrieved, did kind of a research analysis of what courses and how many and what the content was. And they used a framework developed by the African Network for Information Ethics, which is going to actually be the fourth case study we look at here. And so the short ANI for the African Network of Information Ethics out of Africa kind of initiated the entire effort to look at information ethics from an intercultural perspective. They were the first ones to do that, largely with the cooperation of the International Center for Information Ethics. And so a lot of new studies go back to their original work. And so the ANI framework basically states that a global intercultural information ethics must be founded on certain criteria, including bioethics, information ethics and development of knowledge societies, information ethics and development goals, diversity of cultural traditions, cultural literacy, and local content and language. So from a total of 32 departments with graduate programs, only 9 courses with ethics were uncovered. Library and Information Studies courses largely have more information ethics content or ethics content in general in their curricula. And they determined that the outline, Annie's outline for information ethics was not actually compatible with the directive of most of these courses. Most departments do not offer courses devoted to ethical moral issues as presented in the context of the research methods courses. So their recommendations for the field, for their own study as well as for the larger field, is that Library and Information restructures its programs, more information ethics, and indeed incorporate Annie's suggested contents into the courses. LIS should open its doors wide for students from other departments and faculties to register for courses in information ethics. And this is where kind of the interdepartmental angle of information ethics comes into play, especially with education departments. The third case study I looked at before going into my own proposal was done by Michael Zimmer, who is the director for the Center for Information Policy Research. You may or may not be familiar with his work. And the study I looked at there was Innovations and Challenges in Teaching Information Ethics Across Educational Contexts. It was also based on the original Elise development for information ethics. And so there was a conference that Tony herself was at, Competitiveness and Innovation, that convened a panel on the subject. And their goal was to how best to incorporate information ethics education across diverse contexts. This is the list of participants. Some of the names that may be familiar, of course, Tony Samick, obviously. Zimmer's conclusion based on the outcome was that information ethics must be integrated across diverse educational contexts. So we're beginning to see kind of a common theme with the different studies looking at both the interdepartmental and intercultural aspect of the field. It must be framed within multiple discourses. It must critically reflect on the ethical implications of our pedagogical methods and environments. The LIS community of educators and professionals must explore new ways to encourage and capitalize on a diversity of perspectives within the information ethics classroom, provoke critical thinking and push students into new intellectual terrain, and critically interrogate our own language and positioning. So again, the idea of assuming or understanding our biases, understanding our assumed biases, and understanding how those play out in different cultural contexts. The last study, the major one, the original study done, this is actually a kind of a redo of the original study, but done by the same group, the African Centre for Excellence for Information Ethics, located at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And that one is, the study was entitled Curriculum to Teach Information Ethics at Universities in Africa. And so what they did, they started with UNESCO, and they looked at the strategic objective, the strategic objectives of UNESCO in the area for the period of 2014 to 2017, specifically objective number 9, which addresses the right of humans to have access to information and knowledge. The resolution there addresses regulation, accountability, and ethical standards as necessitating the free flow of information. And the curriculum for information ethics for Africa was grounded also in that objective for its own resolution. As per their own curriculum that they've developed for Africa, the development of the ethical use of information communication technology in Africa is dependent on 3 critical factors. Number 1, the existence of ethical guidelines, the empowerment of society in the field of information technologies, and the use of intermediaries as change agents. Their curriculum was to address the unique African needs in the field of information ethics, to create a globally established African network of information ethics, and to remedy the lack of African representation, African academics in particular, in information ethics. The results and successes include the organization of a number of international research workshops and conferences in the field, a website dedicated to the field, development of an introductory workbook in information ethics, which is, I've read partly through it, and I'm impressed with the work done in that workbook. As well as they've compiled a number of readers containing selected conference papers from the work done in Africa, and initiated the development of an information ethics curriculum for Africa. They developed a number of partnerships through their curriculum development, including the Department of Communication in South Africa, UNESCO, several universities in South Africa, South Africa, Africa and wider, and then international as well. They entered into a formal agreement with the University of Pretoria to establish the African Centre for Excellence for Information Ethics. And so looking at kind of that history of branching out beyond the traditional field of information ethics to incorporate an intercultural perspective, I initiated our proposal here, which looks at an international intercultural information ethics curriculum that can be taught online, accommodated, basically customized to various teaching parameters around the world. So my methodology proposes an evidence-based curriculum to be built on best practices and collected materials from practitioners around the world, including both qualitative and quantitative methodologies, first in the collection of the materials, and then in the analysis of the returned materials. So the first stage of the project I've gone through already, although I'm going to actually do a redo of it. It involved the acquisition of materials requested through the community, using the International Centre for Information Ethics as a basis to collecting different materials regarding courses taught around the world in the field of information ethics or closely related to information ethics. So I made my initial inquiry, and I asked a number of pointed questions about teaching and course syllabi, including the very basics, the course name, the instructor's name and education, the university it was taught at, whether it was traditional or online or both, whether it was internationally available or not, especially if it was online, the length of years the course had been taught, whether graduate or undergraduate, and the inclusion of any non-confidential details, including literature and assignments. So the initial response was actually profound. I was a little blown away by how much material I received right away and how many practitioners around the world were willing to be a part of this, at least initially. And so I've received materials from Africa, Europe, North America, as well as a number of other countries so far. And I know for a fact too, just from looking into it, that although I have more than 300, I don't even know how many. I've got some more over the last few weeks and months, but that's only a small fraction of what's available. And acknowledging that the proposal for this project is very grandiose and very inclusive, and certainly not something that's going to be done overnight or by one person, it's daunting to consider the task when you realize how much material is available and what it will involve to try and make a single customizable online information ethics course that can be used around the world. So far the different materials we've collected are pedagogical questionnaires, conference proceedings, both first and second-hand interviews, course syllabi, and specific ethics rubrics from the universities. So stage 2 of the proposal will be to ask participating scholars a number of follow-up open-ended and self-reflective questions on their teaching practices. How is your information course locally informed? How does your information course offer unique perspectives to the field? What specific challenges from the field of information ethics does your course address? What pedagogical challenges does your course face? What cultural barriers does your information ethics course address? What local biases do you feel restrict information ethics teaching? What personal cultural biases prevent you from overcoming your own pedagogical limitations? What makes your information course different from other information ethics courses? And how would you define localization versus globalization in terms of information ethics teaching? So the third stage of the proposal proposes the construction of an online database. It's open source, the methodology of which I'm still looking at, where library and information studies and digital humanities and education scholars can jointly design a database for the presentation and retrieval of different pedagogical resources from around the world for and from teachers in the field. Through the collaboration between information ethics scholars from around the world, the final stage of the proposed project would result in a collaboratively written document that, much like the original one out of Africa, except being wider in scope, addresses the international intercultural information ethics curriculum. And so, as per the special interest group philosophy that kind of inspired the whole thing, the Information Ethics Special Interest Group of the Association for Library and Information Science Education strongly advocates that information ethics should be encouraged as an important aspect of education, research, scholarship, service, and practice in library and information studies and other related professions. It therefore advocates that attention to information ethics, either through the curriculum, instructor, expertise, resources, or symposia, be considered for development by library and information studies education programs. And so leading from that philosophy, the goal of this project aims to explore ways of applying that special interest group philosophy at both an intercultural and international level. It advocates attention to information ethics through curriculum, expertise, resources, and symposia worldwide, and aims to develop cross-disciplinary information ethics curriculum by and for library and information professionals, educational professionals, and beyond. And that is the proposal is still in early development, but open to both questions and suggestions.
Of which I need to pick up on the mic. So we have actually quite a bit of time to have comments, queries, discussion, thoughts for the future. Randy, let me just...
Can you go back to the stage 4 or whatever?
Sorry, stage 4. This collaboratively written document that outlines the intercultural information ethics curriculum, how do you propose to have that adopted, like, worldwide? Is that a goal of?
It's a goal to have it unofficially or officially ratified by the practitioners of the field through the International Centre for Information Ethics. So the idea was to have it much in the same way that the curriculum for Africa was done for the various different universities in Africa, to have representatives from the different universities that teach the field around the world, to have a hand in it, to have it ratified and either adopted by or at least supported by groups such as UNESCO, perhaps through the UN, which much of the initial work through the International Centre already is kind of either connected in partnership with or supported by the UN. And then to have that located centrally at the International Centre for Information Ethics online.
How would the United Nations become involved to begin with? Because that sounds like an obvious place to liaise with.
For sure. In the initial days, and I admit I have to do a lot more research into this, Rafael Capurro, who was one of the pioneers of the field, worked closely with, especially in Africa and later on Japan, with the government officials there, creating these pockets of information ethics groups in the various countries in Africa, supported by the government, and of course with Africa already closely in collaboration with the UN and UNESCO. It was a direct partnership, and so also with WISIS, looking at different ways of kind of aligning what has already been done, like you say in the UN. They have their own information ethics group already, which kind of rose at the same time as the International Centre first got into the field as well. So it was more or less a natural alignment through conversation and support.
Did you have your hand up, Adam? Or no, Tammy, you're next then.
Just pass that mic over. Thanks, Tony. Thank you so much, Jared. That was so interesting. And of course, I don't have expertise in information ethics, but so I actually have two questions. But the first one, I noticed that the Elise conference that you attended was called Competitiveness and Innovation, with this information ethics panel within that. And I'm wondering if you can comment on, you know, library education, the ALA, and how we're accommodating information ethics in, you know, pedagogical and professional associations. And I know that's kind of a woolly question.
Sure. Well, first, the caveat that I'm not up to speed so much on the details of the different organizations in the field of LIS, having kind of ventured off into this. I haven't kept up to speed on the ALA and kind of the different briefings and whatnot there. I know that the main contention with a number of universities in LIS is that there is no information ethics being taught, even though in the conferences and in the conversations, it's a critical piece of the conversation. It's still a struggle to get universities to include either an official information ethics course in an LIS program, or even just an information ethics element within the other established courses. I know Tony's done some work in this as well, and it's a constant advocacy of the importance of the field in especially library and information sciences, but almost as critically in any education-based curriculum in relation to the place that we're at in the information communication technology that kind of undermines or undergirds everything that's done. You know, the Internet of Things is the newest big thing, you know, kind of how our societies, our information societies are now ingrained, if you read the news, in all sorts of political policy conflicts around the ethics of technology and communication and information. The other hat I wear is working for IEEE in advocating the collaboration between engineers and policymakers and trying to make them understand that the critical piece to that is ethics, specifically information ethics. You have engineers who are creating, you know, multiple ways of interacting now with the Internet of Things, where it won't be long before your coffee cup has a chip in it that records how many cups of coffee you drink a day, and you know, light bulbs have cameras in them that are recording your, you know, not just your electricity use, but what you're doing with light. All sorts of, like, numerous ethical issues that need to be addressed, that are being addressed in separate, disparate contexts, but not collaboratively. And so back to just library and information science, I mean, we're the critical piece in that. That's kind of the origin of the field. Everything that's exploded around now kind of finds its way back to, in my opinion, to library and information studies. And so we have not only an obligation, but an opportunity to really be a part of the conversation that is global. It's global in many contexts. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Oh, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you pass that along through Carol to Ally? Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. That is, you know, very interesting and very timely. I have actually a few questions. I'm going to start with the first one, given the multifaceted nature and multidisciplinary nature of information ethics that I've already argued for. So this curriculum, is it going to be heavily focused on library information science, or, you know, I can name 5 different departments on campus that would be interested: computer science, library information studies, communication, philosophy, business, medical sciences. They all deal with information ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my first question. So you do want to answer that first?
Sure. This curriculum will be focused solely on kind of library and information science and studies and the information ethics that have come out of that field. Only because, as you say, it could include any department, it could include industry, it could include government, like it could be, you know, you have to draw the limit somewhere. And so the task of already looking at this at a global perspective is daunting enough. And so having library and information science as the cornerstone to this is plenty, I think. And so, yeah, this curriculum itself is founded and will be centered in library and information studies and closely related fields.
Thank you. So my second question, you mentioned engineering. Now, does the curriculum, or is the curriculum going to include data ethics? Because you're talking about information ethics, and we could, you know, we could talk about information and data and the differences and similarities. But what you mentioned and alluded to earlier about Internet of Things, that does touch on the notion of data gathered automatically or interactively in many different contexts and situations and devices. So would that be part of the curriculum or not?
Yes and no. It would by default, in that, you know, library and information studies look at data ethics. And so as part of that, absolutely. Part of what I was saying before, where all these different aspects, industry, government, they're all looking at the same thing without knowing that they're all addressing these things. So the other answer to that question is no, I'm not addressing, for instance, what I'm doing with IEEE. We're looking at data localization and data ethics, which through an engineering perspective has a certain slant. This won't be addressing the engineering field, but it will be addressing the subject matter as represented through library and information studies.
Right.
I don't know if that answers
It does,
Okay.
it does. And my final question is, you're gathering a lot of textual information. I'm just curious if you at some point would use text analysis techniques and tools, given that the amount is going to be massive,
Yeah.
and there is always some value in automatic text analysis to see what are the key themes, categories, and even theories or methodologies from all those different courses and different sort of materials you gather internationally.
Absolutely. One thing I kind of hinted at in my presentation here, and I should have expanded on it knowing that I had more time. I kind of limited it to my original presentation for Boston, and then I should have expanded more on the fact that my intention with this is to present this to digital humanities, and especially the collaboration between LIS and digital humanities, and all of the different techniques that are being used now to address big data. And you know, there's certainly people in there in digital humanities, and yourself, I know the research you do, that can speak to that far more profoundly than I can as an ethicist, so to speak. And so the project is not something that I would suggest be done by a single person or a single department. It is a collaborative thing, and my vision would be that it's done through a collaboration of education, digital humanities, and library and information studies, looking at text analysis, big data, using those different techniques. A lot of what Jeffrey Rockwell does with his students is applicable too. So one of the things I did not include in the project is a proposal of kind of steps or participation and advocacy, where I would approach the different departments and ask for participation and interest and student involvement and that kind of thing.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Apologies for coming in a little bit late there, but things happen. And I may have missed this as part of the talk. It's one part with maybe a second part, depending on what the answer to the first part is. Sort of, you know, this is in early stages, you're still working this out, but do you see this more as focusing on a curriculum for one individual course that could then be offered to LIS departments, let's say, or do you see this more as a curriculum that would be an undercurrent across, you know, all the courses or most of the courses that an LIS department would teach?
Both, an undercurrent of the different courses taught in different departments, is that what you're getting at, or LIS specifically?
At this point, LIS specifically.
Okay, so what the goal of this was, originally it kind of came also out of conversation I had with Raphael Capro and a few other philosophers, the idea of having somehow an accredited location centered at the center of International Center for Information Ethics that can teach accredited courses online. And so this would be the foundation for a number of courses taught out of the International Center for Information Ethics. I mean, all of this is just, you know, kind of thinking out loud. You know, one of the questions is, could such a thing even be accredited? The whole shift right now of education from traditional classroom to online teaching is in flux, and you know, different conversations around that. But the idea is that there would be a number of courses, not just a single course, in the field of information ethics. So if you look at universities who teach information ethics, it's not a single course titled information ethics. It's a degree or a large set of different courses with different names, different focus, that are all information ethics courses.
Well, I mean, I'd say what comes to mind for me is the role that social justice plays in the curriculum here at the Alberta LIS school here, you know, at SLIS.
Sure.
In terms of that, there is a course on intellectual freedom and social responsibility that Tony's teaching right now, but then there's also social values, social justice issues that are raised throughout the curriculum in different courses along the way, like it's part of the school's philosophy and vision. So that was sort of what I was trying to get at, is whether it was more of that kind of an approach or somewhere, you know, more of an individual course or somewhere in between. It sounds like you're saying it could be any and all of those, depending on the specific situation.
Well, and I would make the argument, and it certainly has been made for the field of digital humanities as well, that information ethics, like digital humanities, is kind of a transition field, that it's bridging two worlds, and, you know, if you will, the old world and the new world, and that someday it will disappear. There will be no digital humanities. There will be no information ethics, because as an individual field, because as you say, it will be incorporated. And right now, technology is taking off so fast that, you know, we're trying to bring that together, both in digital humanities, trying to bridge humanities, traditional humanities, with digital tools, right? The same with the ethics side, trying to bridge original or, you know, traditional social justice humanities with ethics as it applies through technology. So, I mean, the idea is that someday there won't be that bridge. Like you said, it'll be incorporated into all courses, all fields.
And then I understand from your answer to one of Ali's questions that you're mostly focusing on this right now in LIS and digital humanities, and not so much incorporating elements of, like you mentioned, communication or computer science or information technology, not so much those other fields that might have some relation to data, information technology, knowledge, you know, business is certainly part of that, right?
Yeah. The original field of information ethics about 10, maybe 15 years ago looked at drawing up a taxonomy for the field, and something that I actually readdressed in my own thesis. You know, what can be called an information ethics field? And the traditional idea was it includes 5, if I get this right, 5 fields: computer science, media, business ethics, bioethics or bioinformation ethics, and then library and information science. So those are kind of the traditional taxonomy of information ethics. The idea now, though, that you can either say that every field is relevant to it, or that it's just so diluted that there is no taxonomy to information ethics anymore. But if you want to look kind of at a taxonomy for it, includes business ethics, bioinformation ethics, library and science, computer ethics, which also included cyber ethics, which were looked at differently at one time, but the practitioners now include those as one thing.
I'm not sure how to formulate this question, but when you talked about IEEE, which for those listening is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, my interest perked up because I'm the engineering librarian. There's a number of one-day courses that are taught here, and for example, CME 200, which is the Introduction to Chemical Materials Engineering, they cover elements of ethics, equity, concepts of sustainable development, environmental stewardship, things like that. I know that's not information ethics, but it is something that the engineering students learn about. And in Canada, they have the Iron Ring ceremony, which you may be familiar with, where they get a...
I'm not specifically know.
Well, it's sort of their pledge to uphold integrity and ethics in the profession.
Okay.
But I'm curious to know if you have time to expand on what you're doing with IEEE.
So I'm new to IEEE, a few months only, so I'm really still trying to even get my bearings on the corporate culture of IEEE. But I've come in at a new initiative called the Internet Initiative that basically looks to bring together technologists and policymakers in both localized contexts and global contexts, doing very much the same types of things that we're doing in information ethics, but from a policy perspective, you know, government law, and a technological perspective. So how does an informed policy address the technological issues when policymakers don't have the expertise to do so? Likewise, how can an engineer address policy when they have, you know, their specific expertise? An engineer can inform a policymaker and vice versa, but it's a long, wide conversation. And so that's kind of the initial place that I've come into there as well. Just in the last few weeks, I've been talking to some of the people who head the ethics directions of IEEE, of which there are both official and unofficial initiatives being developed. They're very much recently looking into ethics, and specifically information ethics, as both necessary and relevant to what IEEE does and has done and will take place, specifically regarding internet governance. So a lot of what I've done is addressing what the internet is going to be what's it going to look like when we hand it off, when ICANN hands it off to an international multi-stakeholder community. Right now it's still kind of stewarded by the United States. What will that look like? Will there be differences in cultural policy aspects? Will there be differences in technological aspects? Like China, for instance, wants their own internet. They want internet sovereignty. How does that play into ICANN? And the whole, it's new, it's complicated, and it's complex. It involves technology and ethics, and it's an ongoing conversation that they're actually very much looking into recently.
Details, and like others, I thank you for your talk. I have a lot of contacts at IEEE. Obviously, I've worked with them off and on for the last 20 years, so
Okay.
I'll be interested to learn more about this as it develops.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk to you about it for sure.
We have about 10 minutes left. Does anybody want to jump in? Maybe I'll jump in.
Sure.
I said something flippantly at the beginning, but purposely because I intended to revisit it.
Okay.
And that is that Jared inspires us and students coming through the program still, and recent grads and alumni, and those around us, to think about the world as our oyster and to jump off the cliff. I didn't say at that time, which I want to say here, that was with the caveat that there are systemic barriers and issues that we're all fully aware of that are very much addressed within the concerns of intercultural understandings. But as the chair of the school and as a teacher and as a former teacher of yours, I just find it particularly profound that you're coming out of the program with a double master's, not the PhD. You've achieved work at an international level, virtual work at a distance, that you're contributing at such a level that you are contributing to scholarship and fostering a global interest in ethical concerns as unpaid work. This project, as far as I understand it, is unpaid work.
It is, yeah.
It gives us pause, those of us with the privilege of the PhD and the full-time gig and the academic freedom and the access to money pots. It really gives us pause to pay attention to the notion of community and common project, and that with intention, conviction, and courage, really, we can do some projects that we don't think we can do. You are a gift to the community, and you remind us to pull together and to look around for common projects that we can engage in. I hope that we can support you beyond making this talk available. We'll archive it on the SLIS website. You can send it around in the community that you're working with, the communities you're working with. We can send it around. We can come back to it. I also want to just stress from a personal standpoint the importance of that community, because Raphael invited me to Germany in 2004 for the first gathering, face-to-face gathering of people teaching in information ethics, which means we were teaching it pre-2004. Bernie Froman and I were invited from Canada. We met there with about 50 people from around the world. Volkswagen sponsored it. And it was from that I met some North American colleagues. From that, we co-founded the Association for Library and Information Science Education Information Ethics Special Interest Group. I was the first chair of that, and we proposed that position statement on information ethics in LIS education, which was ultimately ratified in January 2008. We did get hung up for a year in red tape and bureaucracy over the word should versus could, which I've talked about before and I've written about. And we have burnout. I mean, there's an ethos to these things, and it's years and years and years sometimes just to get a statement, just to get some guest lectures, to get a module in a course, let alone a course. I think we do need folks like you and Raphael and the ICIE, International Center for Information Ethics, and collaborators that are working alongside, complementary to, but are not constrained by the academies and the rights and responsibilities of academic freedom and curriculum committees and oversight we have with the American Library Association and the crediting body. We can't do everything we want to do. We need to partner. It would be great if there was this online international intercultural resource that those of us in the LIS schools could at least counterpoint with. Maybe somebody's academic freedom, they don't want to use that course, but they can counterpoint with the course. Maybe somebody does want to use the course. Maybe ALA as an accrediting body isn't particularly interested in that course, but that doesn't prevent us from using it. Maybe they will get behind it. We always wondered in that core group if the Association for Library and Information Science Education actually was the best place to put the statement. We had already in advance the support of IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, and we had in advance the support of the International Center for Information Ethics. We had intention as North American LIS scholars to base it in Elise, but it cost us time, it cost us burnout, and it comes with constraints. First of all, Elise has no enforcement authority over any LIS school. It's a persuasion and consensus building document, as ICIE would be, unless the universities get on board. So when you think about all of those layers, it is a common project, and we do need, no one group is going to have world domination on this, and we do have to work together. But the freedoms and the constraints that come in the academy and with our professional associations, we do need to partner with organizations. And I just think this project really does make us mindful of, there's no lock on who has the expertise. Yeah. And the intercultural thrust of this is actually really humbling to think about. And it prompts us to be more mindful in the teaching and learning community. I was really glad, Randy, it's just fantastic that you came today to have an engineering librarian in the room. And I just want to thank you for just compelling and provoking us to think about common projects. And we support you and wish you well, and we'll be talking. And I hope that those watching it, certainly talk to those in their communities about, is there a way that they can pitch in and help out? Do you want to have a few last words?
Sure. Well, basically thank you, Tony, for your kind words and for inviting me. I think just to have this available, even recorded, to hand around, to advocate, to maybe garner further interest in different groups is a start. And it is, like you say, a community project. One of the things that I've appreciated doing this is how much you can do when you're not constrained by bureaucracy, by positions, whether in a university or industry. If you're willing to do it, you can do whatever you want to do without money usually. But it can be done, and like you say, the key is community. It's people with expertise and interest willing to get on board, even for a while, even to give it some momentum. And with time, and cultural interest, it could become something that's very relevant and, like you said, Ellie, very timely with what's going on in numerous fields regarding not just information, but the societal implications of information communication technologies, especially now with the Internet of Things and all of the ethical quagmires that we're going to be getting involved with. Very timely, very relevant. So thank you, Tony.